At 77, Gale Sayers left behind a legacy so bright that even time could not dim it. Yet behind that brilliance lived 5 hidden truths he rarely spoke aloud. To the world, he was the Kansas Comet, a flash of light that cut through the field with impossible grace. To his teammates, he was the quiet storm, the man who could turn a broken play into a legend. To the league, he was the standard for purity of talent, the very image of what raw football perfection looked like. But as he reached the final chapters of his life, those close to him began to understand something deeper. His story was not simply about speed elegance or the poetry of broken tackles. It was about everything the public never saw. The injuries that shattered his prime, the rivalries that pushed him harder than praise ever could, the betrayals he never forgot, the doubts that haunted him even while the crowds roared his name. And above all, it was about one truth he carried silently for decades. The truth that greatness never comes without a price, and sometimes the brightest careers burn the fastest because no one protected them. These are the 5 hidden truths Gale Sayers took with him. The choices that shaped him, the scars that defined him, the moments he wished the world would finally understand. The question now is simple. After a lifetime spent running past every defender, what were the truths he could never outrun? Before the hidden truths began to shape him, Gale Sayers arrived in the NFL as a force of nature so rare that coaches, defenders, and even commentators struggled to describe what they were seeing. Born in the quiet rhythm of Wichita and forged in the open fields of Kansas, he grew up with a stride that looked more like a glide. By the time he stepped onto an NFL field in the mid-1960s, the league had never witnessed a runner who moved like a whisper, yet cut like lightning. Chicago believed it had drafted a star. What it received was something closer to a phenomenon. Sayers did not run so much as he flowed. His body leaned in ways that seemed anatomically impossible. His feet barely touched the ground. Defenders swore he changed direction without planting, as if his mind moved quicker than physics could catch up. His 6-touchdown masterpiece in 1965 announced him not just as a rookie, but as a new definition of what the position could be. Chicago's identity shifted overnight. When he lined up in the backfield, stadiums held their breath. For a moment, every fan understood what it meant to witness grace sharpened into a weapon. Yet behind the highlight reels and the effortless brilliance was a young man entering a league that demanded more than talent. The NFL of his era was unforgiving. It punished vulnerability, dismissed pain, and rewarded silence. It asked its stars to carry rosters, fan bases, and cities while giving little room for fragility. Even for someone as gifted as Sayers, the pressure settled early. Every step he took only raised expectations higher. Chicago adored him, but the franchise leaned heavily on his magic. Coaches pushed him to absorb more touches, more hits, and more responsibility than any back his size should have endured. He never complained. He rarely spoke. He believed greatness required sacrifice, and for a while that belief carried him. His friendship with Brian Piccolo softened the grind, giving him a brother in a sport built on collisions. Their bond became legendary, immortalized by tragedy. Yet Sayers kept most of his emotions behind a quiet wall. But beneath that calm exterior, conflict simmered. The league questioned whether elegance could survive brutality. Opponents took pride in hitting him harder. The Bears struggled to protect him, and every cut, every attempt to escape a defender's grasp placed more strain on knees that were never meant to carry such weight. The world saw poetry. Sayers felt the accumulating cracks. This was the world he stepped into, a world that cheered brilliance but showed little mercy, a world where 5 hidden truths shaped the rise, the fracture, and the lasting myth of the Kansas Comet. At the edge of Gale Sayers' rise stood one opponent who forced him to dig deeper than the world ever realized. His name was Deacon Jones, the fearsome defensive end whose reputation traveled ahead of him like a warning. Jones was not simply a star. he was the embodiment of intimidation. Every runner who dared cut toward his side understood the risk. Jones punished hesitation. He devoured the unprepared. And when the Kansas Comet burst into the league in 1965, Jones saw not an artist, but a challenge that ignited his competitive fire. Their conflict did not come from personal dislike. It came from physics, philosophy, and pride. Sayers ran with elegance. Jones attacked with violence. One glided, the other collided. One slipped through cracks. The other created cracks with force alone. To a league hungry for spectacle, their clashes represented the purest expression of offense versus defense. But to Sayers, Jones became the first reminder that brilliance alone did not guarantee safety. The tension surfaced during their early meetings when Chicago's offensive line struggled to contain Los Angeles's pass rush. Jones crashed through blocks as if slicing paper. Sayers, trained to anticipate angles, found himself forced to improvise before he even reached the line of scrimmage. Each attempt to cut back only invited Jones closer. The hits were clean but devastating, each one echoing a little longer than the last. Coaches praised Sayers for standing tall. Teammates admired his silence. But beneath the stoic exterior, he filed away the truth. Jones was the first defender who made him understand how thin greatness could feel when met with relentless power. The defining moment arrived during a late-season clash when Chicago desperately needed momentum. Sayers took a pitch to the right, trusting his instincts to find space. Jones read it instantly. With frightening speed for a man his size, he exploded off the edge, closing the distance faster than Sayers expected. The running back planted his foot ready to slip past as usual, but Jones anticipated the cut. The collision sent a shock through the stadium. The crowd gasped. Sayers bounced up quickly, refusing to show pain, but the message had been delivered. Even the Kansas Comet could be caught. Film rooms replayed the hit for weeks. Analysts admired Jones's discipline. Teammates studied Sayers's resilience. But only Sayers understood what truly lingered. Jones had exposed a vulnerability. He had shown that even the most graceful athlete could be forced into the dirt when brilliance met brutality. The rivalry sharpened Sayers, pushing him to evolve, but it also planted a seed of awareness he never spoke about publicly. That moment became a silent checkpoint in his mind, a reminder that every defender wanted the honor of being the one who stopped him. In private, Sayers never blamed Jones. He respected him deeply. But the cold truth remained. Their collisions marked the beginning of a subtle shift in how he viewed the game. It was no longer only about beauty. It was about survival, and he never forgot the defender who taught him that lesson. Gale Sayers respected him. But he never forgot Deacon Jones. Before the injuries, before the silence, before the weight of expectation tightened around him, Gale Sayers found strength in one of the most unexpected places. His teammate Brian Piccolo was not a star. He was not a phenom. He did not share Sayers's supernatural speed or poetic instincts. Piccolo was a grinder, the type of player who earned every yard through stubbornness rather than talent. Yet, in the cold machinery of the NFL, where egos collided as often as helmets, Sayers discovered that Piccolo was the only person who understood him without needing explanations. Their bond grew slowly. Sayers was quiet, introverted, a man who spoke through movement. Piccolo, in contrast, was loud, upbeat, and endlessly teasing. Coaches expected friction. Instead, they became inseparable. Chicago's decision to assign them the same room on the road was seen as a minor logistical choice. But for Sayers, it became an anchor in a world filled with pressure. He had someone who cut through the noise, someone who replaced judgment with humor, and someone who challenged him not as a rival, but as a brother. But as Piccolo's health declined, everything shifted. The first signs were subtle: shortness of breath during runs, fatigue during simple drills. Sayers tried to pretend it was temporary. The NFL demanded denial. Players ignored pain because acknowledging it felt like weakness. But when Piccolo collapsed during a game, the truth became unavoidable. The man who had carried Sayers through emotional storms was fighting something far deadlier than any defender. Sayers visited him in the hospital often. He spoke little. He never knew how to articulate fear, but he felt it deeply. Piccolo's struggle forced him to confront his own vulnerability, something he had always outrun. The world watched Piccolo's battle with cancer through news reports, but Sayers lived it quietly, watching a friend fade piece by piece. And when Piccolo passed away in 1970, something inside Sayers cracked. The league mourned, fans cried, but Sayers internalized the pain in silence. The defining moment came months later at the awards ceremony, where he received the George Halas Courage Award. Instead of talking about his own rehabilitation from a devastating knee injury, he stepped forward and said words that stunned the audience. He told the world that the true courage belonged to the man who fought a battle far greater than football. His voice wavered, but his conviction did not. That speech became immortal, later recreated in film, but what no one understood was how much it cost him to say it. Piccolo's death changed Sayers' approach to the game. He trained harder. He pushed further. He refused to waste the talent his friend had admired. Yet the burden weighed heavier each season. The league saw a graceful athlete fighting to return to form. Sayers saw a promise he felt obligated to keep, even as his body began to betray him. He carried Brian Piccolo's memory as both a source of strength and a wound that never fully healed. For most athletes, greatness arrives gradually. For Gale Sayers, it happened in a burst so brilliant that even defenders could only watch in disbelief. But hidden behind the highlight reels and the praise was a truth he rarely acknowledged. His prime, the full expression of everything he could have been, lasted far shorter than the world realized. And the reason was a single moment that changed the entire trajectory of his life. It was late in the 1968 season when the Kansas Comet took a pitch toward the right sideline. His movements were as fluid as ever, each step light, each cut calculated. But as he darted upfield, a defender lunged low. The hit was legal, almost routine, but the angle was brutal. His right knee twisted under his body, and for the first time in his career, Sayers stayed on the turf. The stadium fell silent, sensing something irreversible had occurred. That injury was more than torn ligaments. It was an abrupt halt to a masterpiece still being painted. At just 25 years old, the league had only glimpsed fragments of what he was capable of becoming. Analysts believed he could have rewritten record books. Coaches believed he could have defined the position for a generation. Teammates believed they were witnessing the early years of a player destined to outshine them all. But one moment of misfortune turned prophecy into speculation. Sayers attacked his rehabilitation with the same intensity that defined his playing style. He trained until his body trembled. He pushed through pain that would have ended lesser careers. In 1969, he returned, and in a display of sheer will, he led the league in rushing. But something was missing. His cuts lacked the same fluidity. His acceleration came half a beat slower. Grace had become effort. Magic had become calculation. The public applauded his comeback as a triumph. The league celebrated his perseverance. But Sayers knew the truth. That season was a testament to determination, not a reflection of the athlete he once was. He had rebuilt his body, but the injury had taken something irreplaceable. The effortless poetry that once separated him from every other back had turned into a constant negotiation between ambition and limitation. The defining moment came during a mid-season game when he tried to break free on a play that would have been routine before the injury. He cut left then right, but the knee hesitated. A defender caught him from behind, something that rarely happened in his prime. Sayers did not complain. He did not gesture in frustration. He simply jogged back to the huddle with a quiet acknowledgement that the Comet's tail had shortened. Over time, the weight of that truth grew heavier. Each practice reminded him of what he once felt in his stride. Each film session showed flashes of a version of himself that no longer existed. Injuries piled on, confidence thinned. The league moved forward without slowing for anyone, even the players who made it unforgettable. Cold truth. The injury did not end Gale Sayers' career instantly. It simply stole the version of himself the world never got to see. Gale Sayers respected coaches. He followed orders without complaint. He believed discipline sharpened talent and that football demanded a chain of command. But behind the calm exterior, there lived a tension he rarely discussed. It involved Jim Dooley, the Chicago Bears head coach, during one of the most fragile stretches of Sayers' career. Their relationship was never hostile, never loud, never dramatic. Yet it shaped one of the hardest truths Sayers carried with him. Sometimes loyalty to a coach meant sacrificing pieces of himself he could never get back. When Sayers returned from his devastating knee injury, he was still a symbol of hope, but his body was a different landscape. Cuts demanded more effort. Acceleration required more faith. And pain, once something he could outrun, began following him everywhere. Most players would have eased into the season. Most coaches would have limited contact, protecting the long-term value of their franchise star. But Dooley saw Sayers not as a player recovering from trauma. He saw him as the centerpiece of a struggling offense that needed salvation immediately. Dooley's philosophy was simple. If Sayers could stand, he could play. If he could play, he should carry the ball. Practices intensified, expectations sharpened, without saying it. Directly, Dooley pushed him into workloads designed for men with too healthy knees. Teammates watched with unease. Trainers whispered warnings. But Sayers never objected. His identity had always been tied to perseverance. Speaking up felt like betrayal. So he absorbed the hits, forced himself through drills, and pretended each step felt as light as the old days. The defining moment of their unspoken conflict came during a game when the Bears trailed late and Dooley insisted on riding Sayers, despite the visible strain in his movements. On one play, Sayers took a handoff and tried to cut inside a collapsing pocket. His knee wobbled. A defender caught him awkwardly. For a split second, he stayed down, not in agony, but in resignation. Teammates hurried over. The crowd held its breath. Dooley simply signaled the next play. To him, the drive mattered more than the man carrying it. Sayers finished the game. He always did. But as he walked to the locker room favoring his injured leg, he understood what the league demanded of its stars. Not gratitude, not protection, not patience. It demanded availability even when it was physically impossible. And the person who symbolized that truth more than any defender was the coach who kept handing him the ball long after his body begged for rest. The coldest truth was the one he never said out loud. He admired Dooley. He appreciated the faith. But he knew the workload accelerated the decline he fought so desperately to stop. Greatness required sacrifice, but the line between sacrifice and self-destruction blurred under Dooley's command. And by the time Sayers realized it, the damage was irreversible. He respected Jim Dooley, but he knew those decisions cost him years he could never reclaim. Through every clash, every comeback, and every quiet burden, Gale Sayers confronted one truth that overshadowed all others. It was not a rival, not a coach, not even an injury. It was the system he played in. The league that praised him, promoted him, and immortalized him was the same league that failed to protect the most gifted runner of his generation. And it was this contradiction that shaped the deepest hidden truth of his life. When Sayers entered the NFL in 1965, the sport was shifting. Speed thrilled crowds, offense filled stadiums, stars sold tickets. The league embraced players like Sayers as symbols of the future. Yet for all the admiration, there was no structure to preserve their longevity. Medical care was primitive. Player safety protocols were non-existent. Knee injuries were treated with hope rather than science. And for a runner whose poetry relied on precision, that environment was a ticking clock. Sayers played in an era where toughness outweighed caution. Players were praised for finishing games with injuries that would sideline modern stars for weeks. Helmets were thin, fields were unforgiving. Practices inflicted as much damage as Sunday games. The league's message was simple. If you could run, you played. If you could walk, you practiced. And if you complained, you were replaced. For someone like Sayers, who carried himself with humility and quiet resolve, this culture became a silent antagonist. He never demanded protection. He never requested lighter workloads. The league interpreted his silence as invincibility. Coaches leaned on him without restraint. Opponents targeted him without worry of consequence. And the Bears, desperate for an identity, placed their entire offensive survival on his shoulders. The defining moment revealing this truth came years after his career ended. Medical experts finally re-examined the injury that derailed his prime and concluded that with modern procedures, he would have returned fully, perhaps even stronger. The thought stunned him. His career, defined by brilliance and abbreviated by misfortune, had not ended because his body betrayed him. It ended because the league lacked the tools, the knowledge, and the urgency to safeguard the athletes who carried its future. This realization stayed with him. He never spoke it with bitterness. He never placed blame on one person. But he understood the irony that haunted him. He had been the league's most dazzling runner, yet no one created a system that could preserve that gift. Fans saw a comet streak across the sky. They never saw how quickly the atmosphere burned it away. In private conversations late in life, friends recalled him reflecting on how different things might have been. Not for fame, not for records, but for moments he wanted to experience fully without pain or fear of collapse. He wondered how long he could have played, how many moves he could have mastered, how many memories he could have given the game he loved. The league celebrated his brilliance, but it never protected it. Outside the 5 defining truths that shaped Gale Sayers' rise and decline, there was one more figure whose presence revealed a quieter, more complex layer of his story. That man was Dick Butkus, the ferocious middle linebacker who shared the same uniform, the same field, and the same burden of carrying a team that often leaned too heavily on individual greatness. Their relationship was not built on dramatic conflict or emotional declarations. It was built on mutual respect, forged through pain, expectation, and survival, within a franchise that demanded everything while giving little in return. Butkus represented the other side of the coin Sayers lived on, where Sayers dazzled through elegance, Butkus enforced through brutality. Where Sayers glided past defenders, Butkus smashed through ball carriers. They were twin pillars of a roster that struggled to match their brilliance. And in that imbalance lay the bonus truth. Seeing Butkus absorb hit after hit reminded Sayers of the unforgiving nature of the game. Watching his teammate push through injuries he should never have played with forced him to confront a harsh reality. The silence expected of stars was not courage. It was expectation, masquerading as honor. The defining moment of this truth surfaced during a late-season game when Butkus limped to the huddle, refusing to leave the field, despite obvious pain. Sayers recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same silent obligation he carried within himself. They exchanged no words. They needed none. In that brief moment, Sayers understood the deeper cost of greatness in their era. The league celebrated effort, but ignored suffering. It praised loyalty, but overlooked consequence. Through Dick Butkus, Gale Sayers learned that silence did not protect legends. It consumed them. Gale Sayers' journey through the NFL reads less like a traditional career and more like a brilliant but fragile constellation. Each star in that constellation represented a moment of triumph, a moment of pain, or a moment of truth that shaped the man he became. When we gather the 5 hidden truths together along Voy, the silent lesson he learned from Dick Butkus, a fuller picture of the Kansas Comet finally emerges. It is not the sanitized legend the league promotes. It is not the highlight reel most fans remember. It is a portrait defined by beauty sacrifice, loyalty, and the quiet cost of greatness. His rise was breathtaking, almost unreal. In an era defined by collisions, Sayers introduced a new language to the sport. He moved in curves instead of lines. He slipped through gaps that did not exist until he created them. He turned routine plays into small miracles that left defenders grasping for shadows. But behind that, Grace was a young man, learning how quickly beauty could attract danger. Deacon Jones taught him the first lesson. The league would celebrate him when he ran, but it would not shield him when he was hit. Every matchup against Jones reminded him that brilliance was a target as much as it was a gift. Then there was Brian Piccolo, the teammate who revealed the emotional core of Sayers' story. Their friendship showed the world that vulnerability existed even in the toughest sport. Yet for Sayers, Piccolo's illness carved a wound deeper than any injury. It showed him that life could blindside you harder than any defender. Watching Piccolo fight for breath while the league continued its weekly march forced Sayers to confront a truth he rarely voiced. Football demanded everything from its players but offered very little when the cheering stopped. Piccolo's struggle was a mirror that reflected Sayers' own fragility, the fragility he spent his entire career outrunning. The knee injury of 1968 became the fracture line of his legacy. Before it, he was unstoppable. After it, he was a man trying to rebuild a masterpiece with tools that were never meant to fix something so delicate. His comeback season in 1969 filled stadiums with hope, but Sayers himself understood the truth. He returned without the gift that made him singular. The world admired his courage. He quietly mourned the part of himself he lost. Jim Dooley then added another layer to that fracture. The coach believed in him so fiercely that he ignored the cost of that belief. Sayers respected him, but he understood years later that loyalty had pulled him deeper into a cycle of damage. Each carry was both an act of devotion and an act of erosion. Dooley represented the structural flaw of the era. Coaches treated stars not as humans, but as solutions. Sayers was a solution until his body could no longer solve anything. And towering above all the truths was the system itself. The league, powerful and unyielding, profited from stars but did little to preserve them. It adored Gale Sayers' brilliance but never built safeguards for it. He played in a time when science trailed far behind talent, and when players had no voice strong enough to demand care. Had he entered the league decades later, he would have been protected, restored, even prolonged. But instead, his career became one of the most dazzling short stories in the history of the sport. A comet, bright enough to ignite the sky, yet brief enough to leave everyone wondering what more he could have been. Late in his life, Sayers reflected on all these moments with a sense of calm, rather than bitterness. Friends recalled him speaking about the joy of the game, the privilege of playing, and the gratitude he felt for every yard he earned. But beneath the warmth was an undeniable understanding. Greatness had come with a price. His story was shaped as much by scars and silence as by touchdowns and cheers. In the end, his legacy stands untouched, not because of records which he never had enough time to chase. Not because of longevity, which the league never allowed him. His legacy survived because of what he represented. He was the athlete who turned movement into art. He was the star who showed humility in an age of bravado. He was the teammate whose loyalty shaped one of the deepest friendships in NFL history. He was the example of how brilliance can flourish even in hostile conditions. And when he passed away at 77, the world finally understood something they had missed during his playing years. Gale Sayers was not remembered for being fast. He was remembered for being unforgettable. His light burned quickly because nothing that bright was meant to last long. But the sky remembers every comet, and football remembers him. Gale Sayers' story is more than a chapter in NFL history. It is a reminder of how fragile greatness can be and how powerful a legacy becomes when it survives beyond statistics, seasons, and time. His 5 hidden truths reveal a man who fought battles the world never saw, carried burdens he never spoke about, and still managed to leave an imprint that changed the shape of football forever. If his journey teaches us anything, it is that brilliance often comes with a cost, and the men who shine the brightest are sometimes the ones who endure the most in silence. So now the question turns to you. Which of these hidden truths surprised you the most? Was it the rival who taught him about danger? The friendship that revealed his heart? The injury that stole the future he deserved? The coach who pushed him past his limits? Or the league that celebrated him without knowing how to protect him? Every truth adds a new layer to the legend of the Kansas Comet, and every layer changes the way we see him. If you found meaning, insight, or emotion in uncovering the story behind Gale Sayers' greatness, then you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel was made for. NFL Hidden Truths exists to bring you the untold stories of football's golden age, the stories hidden behind highlight reels, the stories that shaped legends from the inside out. If you want more rare histories, deeper perspectives, and revelations you will not find anywhere else, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And join us again as we continue to uncover the hidden truths that defined the giants of the game.